Ricardo's dilemma. Ricardo's dilemma. Focus question. How can a dilemma cause us to look at things differently? Chapter 1. Now listen up, class. Don't forget to bring a sack lunch tomorrow for our field trip. We'll have such a wonderful time, Mrs. Periwinkle called out. The end of the school day had finally arrived. The bell rang and Ricardo was almost safely out the door when Mrs. Periwinkle stopped him in his tracks. Aren't you looking forward to our field trip tomorrow? I am very excited for you to see the ballet and tour the opera house. I know you'll just love it. Oh yeah, of course I'm excited. Thanks, Mrs. Periwinkle. I'll see you tomorrow. Ricardo forced a smile for his teacher as he hurried past her and into the hallway. The trust, truth was, he was much more excited about the playoff hockey game against the Tigers, and the game was going to start in less than 2 hours. Ricardo was the leading scorer on his team, and the playoff game was all that his mind had been occupied with for several days. He reached the front door and headed outside. His fast-paced walk turned into an enthusiastic sprint as he pulled his cap tightly down over his head. Look out, Tigers! Here we come! He shouted. Chapter 2. The following morning, Ricardo sat smiling as he remembered the winning goal he had scored at the playoff game. I knew we would win, he told his mother as she joined him at the breakfast table. We're going to the champions this year. I can feel it in my bones. That's great, dear. Now, are you ready? We have to get going. I agreed to go on the field trip with you and your classes, and I have the day off work. I think it's wonderful that your teacher is taking you to see the ballet. Cinderella is such a fun story. And besides, not everyone has the opportunity to see all that's happening backstage before the show begins. This is going to be a fabulous day. I can feel it in my bones, she said with a wink of her eye. Ricardo grabbed his backpack and said, Okay, let's get these over with. Little did he knew that this excursion would change his life forever. Chapter 3. As the class entered the opera house, Mrs. Periwinkle gave their tickets to the man at the counter, who made a call on his tiny black walkie-talkie. Soon a tall, lanky man appeared. Max was his name, and he had rosy cheeks and an enormous smile that made it almost impossible for anyone not to like him. With an exuberant wave, he led the class to an expensive space where several people in costume were milling around. The tour guide told the students that these were the stars of the ballet. Ricardo watched as the dancers warmed up. Some were pointing one foot toward the ceiling while posed on the other foot, and some were spinning in endless circles, arms arched above their heads. Still others were sitting on the floor, their upper bodies bent incredibly far to one side while they rolled their ankles in circles. They seemed to be focused too intently on what they were doing that they didn't notice anyone around them. Ricardo watched, amazed by their concentration. He couldn't have imagined that ballet dancers were so serious about their work, just like a player warming up before a big game, he thought to himself. Max led the class to the backstage area where all the scenery pieces had been arranged and were now ready for the show. There were brightly colored costumes, and he could hear the orchestra warming up in the background. Everything looked so huge that it made Ricardo feel very small. The stage floor would soon be filled with the twirling, stretching bodies they had just seen in the studio. Ricardo felt the excitement grow even more as the colorful lights flashed on from the side of the stage. Wow, this is really cool, he exclaimed to his mother. She smiled and said that she thought so too. Quickly, he looked down and stopped smiling. He reminded himself that he was a hockey player, not a ballet dancer, and he looked around, wondering if any of the guys had noticed how into the field trip he'd been. Still safe, he thought, assured that almost everyone had been listening to Max. Mrs. Periwinkle said the show was about to begin, and Max led them from the backstage area and down the stairs to where they would watch the show. As everyone sat in their places, the lights dimmed and the orchestra began to play. Ricardo couldn't wait for the curtain to rise. Chapter 4. That night, Ricardo found it challenging to fall asleep as he lay in bed remembering the day. Mrs. Periwinkle was right. It was a cool field trip. He couldn't keep his eyes off the dancers. They were so strong, so athletic, so powerful and graceful. Was it possible to be all those things at once? He remembered being so proud of his heritage when he saw the names of two Latino dancers. One was even named Ricardo. They seemed to enjoy themselves so much when they were on stage that at that moment Ricardo decided that he wanted to learn more about ballet. The next morning he shared his thoughts with his mother. I think we should visit a dance studio and find out how much it would cost to take a few classes. That was you could find out if you really like it or not, she said. Ricardo really wanted to learn how to do all the amazing things he saw the dancers perform, but what would his friends think? None of his hockey friends took ballet, and he was afraid they would tease him. But Ricardo was intrigued. He decided he would try a few classes, but he definitely did not want to share his plans and his posts. At least not yet. Over the few months, Ricardo took more and more lessons, first weekly, then with even more frequency. His interest in dance continued to grow, and his instructor told him he was natural. Playing sports had made him strong. His strength helped him perform new and difficult steps. He found that ballet was intense and challenging, but when he got something right, it made him feel like he was on top of the world. Chapter 5. One summer afternoon, Ricardo was wandering through the city zoo with his best friend Jack. They had just finished a great hockey game, winning 5-0. Boy, it just seems like it's impossible for us to lose lately. Our team this year is the best team I've ever been on. I don't want the season to ever end, Jack said. Do you think our championship trophy will be silver or gold this year? Definitely gold, and I hope it is 6 feet tall, replied Ricardo. The boys laughed. They had only 2 more games to win the finish of the season as champions, and both were confident that they could pull it off. Ricardo had been busy during the playoffs, but he had managed to make it to ballet class 3 nights a week. It had become instinctual to him, and the better he got at it, the more he knew that he wanted to dance forever. Ricardo realized he couldn't keep his dancing a secret from his friends for much longer. He just hoped they would somehow understand. Today he had planned to break the news to Jack. He practiced what he was going to say a million times in his mind. He thought and thought until he finally came up with a list of reasons why someone would want to learn ballet. He practiced saying the reasons over in his mind. First, there are people all around the globe who dance ballet. Second, some dancers are known around the world. Third, ballet is incredible exercise. Fourth, there are lots of people in dance class who want to be his friend. Ricardo smiled as he remembered all the other dancers telling him how cool it was for a hockey player to learn ballet. He took a deep breath and got ready to spill his guts to his best friend. Jack, I have to tell you something. You know how I've been really busy lately? That's because when I'm not playing hockey, I'm doing ballet. Ever since our field trip, I have been taking classes. Jack's eye widened in surprise. Ricardo held his breath. Then Jack spoke. That's cool. I noticed you've got some new moves on your skates. It must be the ballet. Ricardo beamed. It must be. From that moment on, the secret was out. Ricardo's friends all agreed that the ballet things was pretty cool. After winning the playoffs, the whole team celebrated by coming to his final show.